Some people will tell you love is supposed to feel effortless, that it should lift you up, that it should never make you question your worth. But what if what you've been calling love is really something else entirely? What if it's not love at all, but attachment masquerading as devotion, desire, or necessity? There's a subtle but profound difference between the two, and the truth is, most of us grow up learning the language of attachment before we ever understand the language of love. Attachment binds. It grips. It demands. It often convinces us that we cannot breathe without someone else, that our happiness depends entirely on their presence or approval. Love, by contrast, is expansive. It nurtures. It allows. It does not possess. It does not bind. It does not make your sense of self contingent on someone else's actions or feelings. And yet, in the quiet corners of our hearts, the lines between the two blur. We confuse dependency for intimacy, obsession for connection, and fear for devotion. And so we cling to people and patterns that drain us, all the while believing it is love. Attachment is insidious because it often arrives disguised as care, affection, or longing. It whispers to you that you need someone to feel whole, that their attention validates your existence, that their absence is a threat to your survival. And because it feels familiar, because it often mirrors patterns you observed in childhood or in relationships you admired, it can be nearly impossible to recognize when it is present. You may find yourself obsessing over texts, replaying conversations endlessly in your mind, analyzing every look, every tone, every pause. You might sacrifice your boundaries, your values, even your self-respect, under the guise of love. And the deeper you fall into attachment, the more it convinces you that this anxiety, this craving, this restlessness is normal, inevitable, or even romantic. And yet, underneath the surface, it is quietly eroding you, teaching you to tether your happiness to someone else's choices rather than your own capacity to feel and be at peace. Love, by contrast, is liberating. It allows space. It encourages growth. It is present without suffocating, connected without controlling. When it is real, you do not feel consumed by longing. You feel accepted, seen, and nourished, even when the other person is not physically present. There is a fundamental ease to it, a trust that does not demand validation at every moment. Love does not create anxiety over absence, nor does it punish when expectations are unmet. Instead, it cultivates security, mutual respect, and freedom. And here is the paradox. You can be attached to someone while simultaneously believing you love them. You can mistake dependence for passion, fear for devotion, or neediness for intimacy. Recognizing the difference is one of the most important emotional skills you can cultivate, because it allows you to love consciously rather than cling unconsciously. And maybe this realization already stirs something uncomfortable inside you, a recognition that you may have been entangled in attachment before, thinking it was love, and now wondering what that means for your heart. It is painful, yes, but it is also liberating. Awareness is the first step toward freedom, and acknowledging the ways in which attachment has shaped your past relationships is not a condemnation of yourself. It is an act of courage. You begin to see patterns, the relentless fear of abandonment, the compulsion to please at the cost of your own needs, the cycles of anxiety and relief that repeat endlessly with the rise and fall of attention from another. And in this clarity, you start to notice a subtle difference between holding on because of fear and staying because of genuine care, between obsessing because of emptiness and valuing presence because it nurtures connection. And if these words resonate with you, if they feel like someone finally sees the quiet confusion you've been carrying in your heart, then stay. Stay here. This space, this voice, this channel, it is for those who long for clarity, for freedom, for love that does not bind, and for the courage to untangle themselves from what is no longer serving them. You are not alone in feeling lost between attachment and love, in wondering whether what you feel is real or conditioned, necessary or optional. The journey toward understanding begins with curiosity and compassion for yourself, with a willingness to observe patterns without judgment, and with the courage to confront the truth that not every intense emotion is love, and that your capacity to feel deeply, even in attachment, is still a testament to your heart's strength. And perhaps the most challenging part is learning to witness your own emotions without being swept away by them. You may notice how quickly attachment convinces you that your worth is tied to someone else's attention, how it makes the absence of another unbearable, and how it creates cycles of longing that feel endless. And yet, with careful observation, you begin to notice the subtle contrasts. Love uplifts, attachment drains. Love allows, attachment clings. Love nurtures freedom, attachment demands control. And in noticing these patterns, a subtle empowerment emerges. The realization that you do not have to accept attachment disguised as love, that you can learn to differentiate, and that you can reclaim the autonomy of your own heart without rejecting its capacity to care deeply. And as you sit with this understanding, a quiet sense of hope begins to take root. You recognize that attachment is not a personal failing. It is a reflection of conditioning, fear, and unmet needs, and it can be unraveled. You begin to cultivate love in its purest form, the kind that supports growth, fosters trust, and thrives without suffocating. And in this cultivation, you notice a shift. Your heart becomes lighter, your mind clearer, your sense of self more secure. You are no longer bound by the invisible chains of dependency. You are learning to love consciously, freely, and fully. And in doing so, you prepare yourself for relationships that honor your depth rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. Attachment often disguises itself in the language of love, so much so that we rarely notice it until the patterns become deeply ingrained. You might recognize it in the compulsive need for reassurance, in the constant checking, in the anxiety that rises when someone does not respond as quickly as you hope. You may cling to someone's presence not because it enriches your life, but because absence feels unbearable. And in this subtle, quiet way, attachment teaches us dependency. It convinces us that our emotional survival is contingent upon someone else's actions or affection. It convinces us that if we do not secure their attention, if we do not please them endlessly, if we do not anticipate their needs before our own, we will somehow cease to exist. And the paradox is that attachment often stems from a place of love, the desire to be close, to be seen, to feel connection, but it becomes distorted when fear overshadows care. This distortion clouds judgment, blurs boundaries, and creates patterns that can leave the sensitive, empathetic heart exhausted, overwhelmed, and questioning its own capacity to truly love. And the first step in transforming attachment into love is recognition. You begin to observe your emotional responses without judgment, to notice when fear, insecurity, or neediness is driving your actions more than care, respect, or genuine connection. You start asking yourself questions that feel radical but necessary. Am I staying with this person because they make me feel alive, or because I am afraid to be alone? Am I giving freely, or am I giving to earn validation? Am I clinging because of love, or because absence feels like annihilation? These are not easy questions, and they may stir discomfort, but in asking them, you begin to cultivate awareness, a subtle yet profound shift that allows you to differentiate between dependency and devotion. And in this space of reflection, a surprising liberation begins to emerge. You realize that the heart capable of attachment is also capable of authentic love, if it learns to distinguish between holding on from fear and holding close from choice. And it is in this awareness that boundaries become essential. True love honors freedom. Attachment often ignores it. You begin to see where your personal limits are, where your energy is finite, and where it is necessary to step back in order to honor both yourself and the other person. You notice the difference between giving to nurture versus giving to avoid loss, between communicating openly and seeking constant reassurance. You understand that love grows in space, in autonomy, in the balance between closeness and individuality. And in setting boundaries, you discover a quiet empowerment, the ability to care deeply without being consumed, to invest without losing yourself, to love fully while maintaining sovereignty over your heart. This is not selfishness, it is clarity, it is maturity, it is the path toward relationships that are mutual, nourishing, and sustainable. And perhaps the most delicate part of this transformation is self-love. Recognizing the difference between attachment and love requires you to turn your gaze inward, to confront the patterns that have left you anxious, fearful, or dependent. You examine the ways you may have sought validation externally instead of cultivating it internally. You acknowledge the moments when insecurity or fear drove your choices, when longing outweighed reason, when need overshadowed care. And instead of shaming yourself for these tendencies, you offer compassion. You recognize that attachment is not a personal failing. It is a conditioned response, an echo of experiences that shaped you long before you had the tools to navigate them. And in meeting yourself with this gentleness, you begin to create a foundation for authentic love, one built not on fear or necessity, but on choice, respect, and emotional presence. And in the midst of this process, you may notice the people in your life in a new light. You begin to see who invites freedom and who demands control. You notice who nurtures your growth and who drains your spirit. And you start to make subtle but powerful shifts, letting go of relationships that perpetuate attachment, investing in those that cultivate genuine connection, and approaching every bond with awareness rather than compulsion. And as these changes unfold, you begin to recognize the quiet rhythm of true love. It is not frantic or consuming. It does not demand constant attention or reassurance. It allows space for individuality, for growth, for imperfection, for autonomy. And the longer you dwell in this understanding, the more you notice a profound liberation, the freedom to love without clinging, to care without being consumed, and to exist fully in yourself even while giving freely to others. And if this resonates, if it feels like someone finally sees the confusion, the longing, the intensity that you carry in your relationships, then stay. Stay with this reflection. This space, this voice, this channel is for hearts like yours. Hearts that have loved deeply, that have been misled by attachment, that long to understand the difference, and that are ready to reclaim their capacity for conscious, liberating love. You are not alone in this journey. And the first step toward that liberation is simple, though not always easy. Awareness, compassion, and the courage to untangle yourself from patterns that no longer serve the heart you wish to cultivate. And in this awareness, you begin to notice subtle signs of true love versus attachment. It feels steady rather than frantic. It supports rather than consumes. It invites rather than demands. You recognize that love does not force. It does not tether. It does not convince you of your worth through fear or control. You feel it in the freedom to be yourself, in the ease of communication, in the quiet joy of connection that neither suffocates nor diminishes your sense of self. And the more you notice these distinctions, the more your capacity to choose wisely expands. You start to understand that love is never frantic, that it does not hinge on absence or attention, that it uplifts rather than constrains. And in this recognition, a profound sense of calm begins to settle in. The understanding that your heart, though it has carried attachment, is fully capable of authentic love, once guided by awareness, boundaries, and self-respect. And now, after the long hours of reflection, observation, and self-inquiry, you begin to notice a quiet liberation unfolding inside of you. The patterns of attachment that once dictated your happiness are no longer invisible chains. They are now recognizable, manageable, and ultimately transformable. You begin to feel the difference between holding on from fear and choosing to stay from love. You see that true love does not bind, does not coerce, does not demand constant validation. Instead, it honors your autonomy, your boundaries, and your capacity to exist fully, even in the absence of the other person. And in this recognition, a subtle yet profound empowerment arises. You realize that your heart is capable of love that is conscious, deliberate, and free, and that your worth is not contingent on anyone's presence or approval. And with this empowerment comes clarity in your relationships. You start to see, without the haze of longing or fear, who invites growth and who drains it, who nurtures your spirit and who diminishes it. You no longer chase, plead, or cling. You observe, discern, and act from a place of awareness rather than compulsion. You learn that sometimes the bravest act of love is letting go, releasing attachment, and allowing both yourself and the other person the freedom to exist fully. And in doing so, you begin to recognize the paradoxical truth. Letting go is not the absence of love, it is the highest expression of it. Love thrives in freedom, trust, and respect. Attachment suffocates, fears, and demands. And the moment you internalize this, your heart begins to feel lighter, your mind clearer, your sense of self stronger than it has been in years. And as you continue walking this path, you begin to notice how consciously choosing love reshapes your entire experience of life. You feel connection without desperation, presence without neediness, intimacy without dependence. You are no longer defined by anxiety over absence, or by the compulsion to secure someone's attention as proof of your value. Instead, you begin to exist in a state of balance, loving deeply, freely, and authentically, while remaining grounded in your own worth. And perhaps for the first time, you experience relationships as they were meant to be, spaces of mutual respect, understanding, and care, where love uplifts instead of consumes, where joy flows naturally without constant tension, and where your heart feels both alive and safe. And yet, this is not a sudden transformation. There will be moments when attachment resurfaces, when fear threatens to cloud judgment, when longing tempts you to revert to old patterns. And in those moments, you meet yourself with patience and compassion, recognizing that growth is not linear. Each recurrence of attachment is not failure. It is opportunity, a chance to practice awareness, to observe without being consumed, to respond rather than react. And in doing so, you strengthen the part of yourself that understands love as a choice rather than a need, as presence rather than possession, as freedom rather than tethering. Each time you make this choice consciously, you reclaim a little more power, a little more peace, a little more authenticity. And perhaps the most extraordinary realization is this: your capacity for love has always been intact. The intensity of your emotions, the depth of your care, the vividness of your longing, all of it is proof that your heart is fully alive, fully capable, and fully resilient. What has changed is not your heart, it is your understanding. You now see that love and attachment are not the same, that care and dependence are not interchangeable, and that happiness, fulfillment, and connection are not gifts to be earned by fear or neediness, but states to be cultivated through awareness, choice, and presence. And in this understanding, your heart expands. You breathe more freely, engage more authentically, and love with courage, clarity, and intention. And as you integrate this awareness into your life, you may notice something remarkable. The world begins to feel different. You approach relationships with a sense of ease rather than desperation. You invest without losing yourself, and you appreciate others without needing them to complete you. Your emotional energy becomes intentional rather than reactive. And in this new alignment, you begin to feel the subtle yet profound joy of conscious love, a joy untainted by fear, unbound by attachment, and deeply nourishing to your soul. You begin to realize that love does not ask you to shrink, and attachment does not ask you to grow. And the choice to recognize the difference allows your heart to flourish in ways it has longed for, yet never fully known until now. And maybe, in these quiet moments of reflection, you understand a final, liberating truth. Love is not something to cling to, and attachment is not something to mistake for devotion. Love lifts, frees, nurtures, and expands. Attachment binds, demands, and consumes. And in embracing this distinction, in choosing consciously rather than reacting unconsciously, you reclaim the sovereignty of your heart. You are no longer at the mercy of patterns, fears, or past conditioning. You are fully present, fully alive, fully capable of loving and being loved in ways that honor both yourself and those you care for. And so, as you move forward, there is a profound serenity in your existence. You no longer need to chase what was never love, and you no longer need to cling out of fear. You step into life with clarity, presence, and a quiet confidence that your heart is enough, that your capacity to love is vast, and that the joy, connection, and fulfillment you seek are available when love is chosen consciously and freely. And perhaps, in the final reflection of this journey, you realize, maybe the love you were always searching for was never out there. It was waiting within you all along, nurtured by awareness, freed from attachment, and capable of rising into something both tender and limitless.